Welcome to Just Minding My Business Media. I hope you're having an amazing day. And today I am so happy to bring to you Doug Lyman, and who has a journey from Marine to Benedictine monk to financial expert showcases. Oh my God, I am just ready to jump in to this conversation. He has a unique blend of discipline, spirituality, and financial insight. After excelling in the Marine Corps and spending 20 years as a monk and math teacher, he transitioned to finance in 2017, becoming a partner at LongView Asset Manager. He has several books out, best-selling book From Monk to Money Manager, which bridged the gap between ethical living and financial success. His latest book, Taming Your Money Monster, he uses the Enneagram and psychology to guide people toward healthier financial behaviors. Wow. I am so honored to have you today, Doug.
It's great to be here. I'm really honored to be on your show.
Absolutely. Wow. You're going to have to tell me, bring us to the transitions from monk to financial, because you've like crossed so many different borders.
Kind of, yeah. I say my life is like a roller coaster ride designed by Salvador Dali on a sugar high. So I started off. I grew up outside Chicago in suburbia, a little town called Naperville, and my parents were relatively affluent. My father was an executive for an oil company and a good man, very loving, very kind. But when my parents divorced when I was about 8, money got weaponized in my family. It kind of became the tool that my parents used to wound each other and control their kids. And, you're on the good list, you get stuff. If you're on the naughty list, you don't get stuff. So there was a sort of performative, everything had strings attached to it. And so I sort of, my brothers and I, in a weird way, we all ended up taking a vow, rebelling against that world and taking a vow of poverty in some way, shape, or form. I eventually ended up in a monastery for 20 years. My twin brother ran off and became a homesteader in Vermont. And my older brother went and joined a moderately successful grunge band up in Seattle. So we all kind of rejected that whole world because we were so kind of revolted by it. And I mistakenly, I made this mistake of thinking that money was the root of all evil. And as St. Paul says that the love of money is the root of all evil. And so if loving money is bad, then the good way to handle something that's bad is to hate it. That was sort of the weird logical twist in my brain. But first, I went off to the Marine Corps to try to prove to my dad that I was a manly man who could do manly things. And I graduated at the top of my class from officer candidate school. And then and then my dad didn't show up for my graduation. And I realized that it didn't work. I was trying to impress him and it just it didn't land. And I also realized that, having unresolved anger issues and using high explosives was probably a bad career choice. And try to project all my daddy issues on bad guys and blowing people up was probably not the best way I could be spending my time. So I went looking for a higher calling. I had a bit of a spiritual awakening. And again, I still had this sort of anti-materialistic worldview. So I said, well, what could be a higher calling than the Marines? What would give me the same brotherhood, the same camaraderie, the esprit de corps, the discipline, the community, all the things I liked about the Marines, I found in a monastery and what I thought was a higher purpose. And, I loved the Marines and I had a great time with it. But so I did that. And so I was there for 20 years and I was the head of a math department at a prestigious school. But one of the things I found in the monastery is that all of us hated dealing with money. And if you're in a community where no one liked talking about it, dealing with it, and really getting into the nuance of finance, then things are going to go sideways. And eventually, the monastery went bankrupt about the third year that I was there. And it turns out we all hated money. So we took the vow of poverty a little too seriously, and someone had to figure out how do we get ourselves out of this quagmire. And for bizarre, whatever random reasons, it fell on my shoulders and took a few years. And I went to the bookstore and I just grabbed every book on personal finance I could find and devoured them. And then I realized I had a talent and skill. And so, um, then what I kind of noticed is that monastery guests, when they would come to the monastery with spiritual problems, there was often a financial issue lurking in the background. Like the financial thing was either a direct cause of the problems or a secondary issue. There might be a death in the family, there might be an estate to probate, there might be lawsuits, credit card debt, whatever. That they'd say they'd come in and they'd ask me to pray for them, which I did. But I also realized that doing that and making a budget would be much more effective. And so I really kind of was good at teaching people. I think that's my real skill. I think ultimately I'm a teacher more than anything else, which is my great love. And so I was able to teach these people how to, pull themselves out of their financial holes and really put their financial life on solid ground. And every other aspect of their life would improve. And so we know that now that poverty is the one of the biggest predictors of mortality that we have. Like poor people get hit with everything more of what you don't want. They get hit more with obesity, addiction, alcoholism, domestic violence, abuse, injury, and death. So the more we can help people pull themselves out of poverty, the more we can alleviate suffering of the world. And so that's where I kind of realized that I think Mark Twain was a bit more accurate when he said that the lack of money is the root of all evil. Like this is the thing that really gets us into trouble. And so what I've really been exploring, and then I of course went on to uh, go on, and that when I left the monastery, I became an investment advisor, and I was managing about $250 million in assets, and loved that. But then yeah, so that was trying to teach people, how do you ethically build wealth? How do you do this in a way that's sustainable for you, for your family, for your community, and the world around you? And so what I'm really exploring in my new book, Taming Your Money Monster, is this psychological tool called the Enneagram, and how our personality type can predict the kind of financial problems that we're each likely to have and how to overcome them.
Wow, that's interesting. Because a lot of times when you talk to money is definitely mental, it's emotional, it's all that wrapped up. And like you said, lack of it, I think, is the root of all evil. Because when you don't have it, all kinds of things, I mean, we all know things are going to happen to you, anyway. And
Right.
most times it costs something. It costs something. So when you don't have money, the problem becomes even bigger because you don't have the resources to take care of it.
Exactly. It's like walking over a tightrope over a pool of alligators every single day. Like it's just the stress of being poor is
Yeah.
unbelievable. And the stress that causes and the suffering it causes, especially for our children, is just something that I feel passionate that we need to help people with.
Yes, absolutely. And mindset around money pretty much in your case is totally different, but childhood. Our childhood has a lot to do with what we think about money.
Right. And so there's two, what I call there's I have this thing called the attachment theory of money, which is
Mhm.
based on the attachment theory of relationships, which you might be familiar with that. But basically what it says is that there's two ways we can have an unhealthy attachment to money. We can either be anxiously attached to it, kind of like Ebenezer Scrooge, or we can be fearfully avoidant of it and put it away, which is what I did for much of my life. And both of those reactions are unhealthy ways in which we self-sabotage our finances and our own happiness. And so really what I'm exploring in this book is we've got these 9 archetypal personality patterns in the Enneagram. And then if we layer on top of that, this attachment theory of money, that gives us 2 unhealthy ways that each of the different Enneagram types have in relating to money in their own unique, quirky, maybe unhealthy habits.
Yes, yeah. So can you get into a couple of the different pillars here?
Sure. So let me just explain how the Enneagram works, just to give you a quick high-level overview, and then maybe just dive into one type. Maybe talk about my type because that's easy. And I know we don't have a lot of time. But the way the Enneagram works is you have to imagine what it was like for you when you were in your mother's womb, when consciousness first flickers on for you, when you first kind of spark up in this world. What was that experience like? And so my hypothesis is that you were unconscious. You didn't have a clear sense of self of me and not me. There's no ego, hasn't really formed yet. And so you're unconscious, but you're in unity with everything that you can experience. And it's a very limited experience, of course, but that's kind of how our journey in life starts. And then we get born, and surprise, there's more to reality than just us. Um, and there's a physical umbilical cord that obviously has to be cut. But then there's this psychological umbilical cord that forms between us and our caregivers. And so our ego becomes sort of codependent or heavily enmeshed with our caregivers for the first few years of our life because they have to do most of the driving in life for us. We're helpless. Children don't even have a sense of object permanence yet. They don't know that things exist when they're not even looking at them. And so over time, we grow and we develop, but that psychological umbilical cord with our caregivers has to be cut. And it has to be cut with negative emotions because positive emotions would just reinforce our connection to our caregivers. Did that track for you so far?
Yes, yes, yes. And when you
Okay.
say negative emotions, what does that mean?
Okay, so we know from the neuroscience, and this is based on the work of an affective neuroscientist named Jaak Panksepp, and he discovered that in the mid-limbic region of all mammals, this is in mice and dogs and cats and us and apes, there's really just three core negative emotions. So all of our other negative emotions are some sort of mixture of anger, sadness, and fear. So anger, sadness, and fear are the three different ways that that psychological umbilical cord can we get hit with all three, but one of those emotions is going to do most of the cutting for you. And that's going to determine where you sort of land on the Enneagram. So the Enneagram, think of a pie, like a pizza pie or an apple pie. And if you break it into three quadrants, right? We're going to have one quadrant's going to be the anger quadrant, and then we're
Mhm.
going to have a sadness quadrant, and then we're going to have a fear quadrant. So how your psychological umbilical cord gets cut determines which of those three quadrants you land into. And then there's three ways to process that emotion. We can either internalize it, which is kind of like giving yourself an emotional wedgie, or you can externalize it, which is like having a food fight with the world, or you can have both. And so that's why there's 9 personality types in the Enneagram, because there's 3 core negative emotions and 3 ways that we can process those emotions.
Okay. So how do people get the book?
You can get it on Amazon. It comes out on July 8th.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Awesome. I've never heard it put this way.
Uh-huh. So, so for example, like with my Enneagram type, I'm what's called a type 3. And that means that my psychological umbilical cord was cut by sadness or somehow shame worked too. They're very similar. It's sort of what we mean by sadness is like separation distress or grief or sadness about how. So for me, what it is, I have both internalized sadness and I have externalized sadness in my core emotional wound. I call this your sacred wound. And that sacred wound for me means that I feel sad about how I perceive myself. That's my internal sadness. And then I have this externalized sadness, which means I feel shame or grief about how I think people perceive me. And so what that does, and we all have what it does, we all have an unconscious greatest fear. So the greatest fear for a type 3 like me is that I'm fundamentally worthless. I feel like I don't have real value in the world because all that sadness is like leaving me feeling like I don't have real value. And so I give all the Enneagram types car nicknames because think of like cars. There's an infinite variety of cars, but there's yours is a unique make and model. And so the Enneagram is like the model of car you're driving. And so I call the type 3 the race car. And we're the race car because we're always gunning for the next achievement, but we're often leaving our authentic selves in the dust. Like we're always trying to like win the race, get the gold star, start the business, make a lot of money, be the A student, whatever the people around us think is important for success. That's what a type 3 wants to embody. They really care about success because losing in any way triggers all that internalized grief and shame. Um, and so threes are like expert mask changers. Like we will change our persona, we will change our mask in a heartbeat to adapt ourselves to whatever we think the people around us will find appealing or will win approval. Um, and so then what that means is all of that, this is all in what we call your shadow structure. This is based on Carl Jung, that we have this shadow structure in our soul. And let me just back up and say, so your personality actually has two parts, right? You've got the nature part, that's your DNA, and you've got your nurture part. So the Enneagram is the nurture part of your personality. So it tells you the chassis of the car you're driving, but it, you know, your DNA will tell you whether you're going to have leather seats and a great sound system or a lousy muffler, right? Those things can fit any kind of ego vehicle, if you will. Um, and so then, but for each type, it then creates what I call your worst vice. So the worst vice for a type 3 is deceit. And that doesn't mean that we're intentionally liars. It means it's the masks we're wearing. We're always putting these masks on. It's a kind of deception. Like we're not letting our authentic self out very easily, which is what we need to learn to do. So what threes need to do is learn to take these masks off. But um, the the money monsters for a type 3 are what I call, then there's these two money monsters. For the three, I call them the barrier and the blinger. So the barrier, like me, that's what my type is, the three who has all this shame and sadness around money that they want to bury their head in the sand like an ostrich and not look at it, because looking at their finances triggers all that shame and sadness. So they're avoidant around money, and they really just don't want to deal with it, like I did when I go into monastery. Like I thought I was going to get away from money and materialism forever. Great, take a vow of poverty, put a robe on, and I don't have to think about this thing ever again. Wouldn't that be great? Well, whoops, that's just not how life works. Um, and then on the flip side, for the three, I have what's called the blinger. So the blinger is someone who might earn a lot of money, but then they tend to spend all of their money on status symbols or bling. Like they want the big house, the fancy car,
Mhm.
the watch, whatever it says, look at me, validate me, tell me I'm important. And so, but that can really be devastating for their financial life, because they may earn a lot, but if you spend everything that you make, or you're spending beyond your means, that's just going to create all kinds of financial issues down the road, which is actually my dad's story. He made a lot of money, but by the end of his life, most of it was gone. So those are two examples. Well, that's one example of for type 3 of what our money monsters are and how they develop. And then there's a flip side to that. There's a whole structure about how then you overcome that and become a money master.
Yes, yes. And I guess it's important to know which category you fall in. And
Mhm.
that's some inner work for sure, because a lot of times we are doing, but we're not necessarily paying attention to the whys. We're doing what we're doing. So how do you support people to recognize this is where I fit in the Enneagram? Okay. How do I overcome it?
Well, okay, so first you got to figure out what your type is, and there's actually some pretty good online tests you can take. I can send you a link to the one that I like. And actually, I have a licensing deal with a company called IEQ9, and I get a kickback whenever anyone takes it through my link. But I can share that with you if you want to put that in your show notes. But first you need to figure out what your type is, and then you kind of need to read my book. It goes into so much depth and detail into all of this. But essentially, what it is, the way to overcome the way to overcome it is your spiritual journey. It's whatever your faith tradition is, you need to go deep into it and connect with your deepest values, and really overcome some of your worst vices and your worst tendencies based on your Enneagram type. And so for a type 3 like me, if I can get over that deceit, then what I need to work on is modesty. Like that would be the virtue for a type 3, is to be more modest in how we present ourselves to the world. Like, because threes are always like, look at me, look at me, look at me, look how amazing I am, look how wonderful I am. We're always trying to impress you. So what a 3 really needs to do is learn to just modesty isn't so much humility, because if you push them down, then that triggers the internalized shame and sadness. So it's finding this sort of balance between narcissistic self-aggrandizement and nihilistic despair. And so you're finding that modest, accurate assessment of who you are as a type 3. That's the first thing. That's a first spiritual practice that a 3 needs to do. And then there's a secondary virtue. And their secondary virtue is going to be faith, which isn't about a particular doctrine or dogma. It's about having the faith to take the masks off. It's the first you have to have modestly find the accurate self-assessment. And then you need to be able to have the faith to take the masks off and let people see who you really are. And then to the highest virtue for a type 3, which would be authenticity, that we're really be able to present ourselves authentically, show our true selves to the world, and mostly to ourselves, because threes don't know who they really are in their core, because they never take the time for that kind of introspection most of the time. But when they can practice that modesty and faith, which leads to authenticity, then they can become what I call the money master, which is the builder. So the type 3 is the builder, who takes all of their talents, all of their resources, and their time and treasure, and rather than using it for inflating their ego, blinging out their life with stuff, or trying to get people to be impressed by their status symbols, instead they're building something of lasting value and significance in love and service to a broken world, which is why I think we are put here on this planet, and why we're called to be wealthy, because wealth is the best tool we have for healing suffering. And so when you deploy it accurately, when you find out what your true talents are, and then you are able to get your financial house in order and have all the resources that you need, now you can go out there and fix the crack in the world that God put you on this planet to heal.
Absolutely. And you said something very, very important, that we're here to serve.
Mhm.
That's the key to everything. And I always say, take the money away and see how much you love it. Because if you can do it for free
Mhm.
and enjoy it, the money will come.
Right.
The money will come.
Yeah.
Wow, this is amazing. Another way to look at our mindset around money. And it's a lot of layers to it. A lot of layers to it. Now, let me ask you, do you work with people to help them? Because sometimes you can read a book, but sometimes you need that accountability to help you move out of that particular mindset, because you're not used to it. So you're kind of stepping outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
So do you support people there?
I do. So if people would like, they can go to my website, which is DougLynam.com. That's DougLynam, DougLynam.com. And there you can get a coaching session with me if you'd like. I also do workshops and retreats, and I do keynote events for conferences. So all of those resources are available, and you can get the book there as well. So that would be a way that people can learn more, can get more educated, and can find all the tools that they need to really tame their money monsters.
Yes, yes. And Doug, I am so happy that you are being authentic, and telling your story about your why you, and that's a huge thing.
Thanks.
That's a
Thank
huge
you.
thing, because a lot of times we hear about the glory, but we never hear the pain
Right.
and the reason why the pain was there. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
You're
So
welcome.
let's talk a little bit about From Monk to Money Manager.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about what that book entails.
Well, I would say that's really a how-to guide. So from monk to money manager, the subtitle is "The Former Monk's Financial Guide to Becoming a Little Bit Wealthy and Why That's Okay."
Okay.
So really, it's just I'm using my personal journey, my life story, all the things I learned in the monastery to teach people the basics of finance, like earning, saving, investing, giving. How do you do all those things? With the nuts and bolts of like budgeting, insurance, taxes. So it's really kind of a very it's everything I wish someone would have taught me about money before I left college or high school. So it's really written for like a high school, college someone, well, it's for anybody really, but it's really all the simple but essentials that I think everyone needs to know in order to be financially literate, to have the tools necessary to navigate their financial life in a healthy and successful way. So it's really that how-to book. And then my new book, Taming Your Money Monster, is more of a why do book. Like, why do you do stupid things with money? So that one's more about the psychology of money, where the first book is really about the nuts and bolts.
Oh, okay. Okay. And that's definitely needed
Mhm,
because, like you said, some people make a lot of money and spend it all.
mhm.
You know what I'm saying? And then when the rainy day come, they don't have anything.
Right.
So you have to have that balance. You have to know
Mhm.
how to balance
Yeah.
financially.
Yeah. And so again, I call it the four pillars of finance. So the four pillars of finance are earning, right? You got to make enough money. Second pillar is saving, right? So if you spend everything that you earn, you're going to be broke. Then the third one is investing. So then you have to take your savings. First, you need a good emergency fund. And beyond that, you need to start investing in the stock market. You need to figure out, or whatever. Stock market is really the easiest place, I think, for most people to begin their investing journey. And I recommend index funds, by the way, if anyone's curious about that. And then in capturing the power of compound growth from the long-term growth of the market. And that's really how all wealth is developed in this country. So then once you have that wealth, then the fourth pillar then of course is giving. How do you give back? Why did you amass all this fortune if it wasn't to use it in service to others? So that's kind of the basic overview.
Yes. Well, you're definitely gonna have to come back here because this is this is a lot to absorb,
Uh-huh.
and we definitely need to break it down into, manageable pieces. And people need to hear this again
Yeah.
so that they can get that understanding that they need to sort through. And I'm so happy that you have resources to help people because most people need, like children, we like kids. I don't care how old we are. When it's new and it's foreign, we need our hands held.
Well, what might be fun if you want to do a show is for another episode is I could come on and walk you through your Enneagram type. We could figure out what your type is and then what your
That,
money monsters are.
wow, that'd be interesting. Yeah, so we could do that. That'll put me in a vulnerable place, but I need to know. I mean, I kind
Yeah.
of know how I think about money. I'm very strategic with money. I save coins, you name it. I believe in having not putting everything in one cookie jar,
Hmm.
but spreading it around.
Hmm.
So, and I learned that over the years. It wasn't anything that from childhood because my childhood was survival mode, so I had to learn that.
Yeah.
I document every nickel.
Well, I got you here. It worked. Congratulations. You're sounds like you're in a good spot now.
And well, it was trial and error and it was learning, along the way what makes more comfort and peace because I'm all about being comfortable and at peace.
Yeah.
Those are my two things that drive me.
All right. Oh, you might be a type 9. That might be a quick guess.
Okay,
Well,
so
because type nines are called the peacemakers. They like everything peaceful. So that might be your type. But put a pin in that. And we can dive into that in the next show.
absolutely, absolutely, Doug. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today and dropping all of these nuggets on us. I hope everybody was writing it down and because it's a lot to absorb and it's inner work.
Mhm.
It's not outer work, it's inner work, and inner work is always much more difficult.
Yeah. Always. Always.
So until the next time, Doug,
All right, Ida. It's
and we
great chatting with you.
did. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, audience, as well, for being a part of this show.